Here, or Tiger Tank 1-2, however you want to call me, I don't really care. And today, as you have already read by the title, we're going to talk about some of these super heavy tanks in World of Tanks. More specifically, we're going to talk about the Japanese tank line that leads up to the Type 5 Heavy. Now, why do I have to make a video of such sorts? Well, I've just recently started playing the Japanese heavy line. Up until the OI experimental, I thought this line was not very enjoyable to play. It's pretty much a tier 5 box that anyone can penetrate. It's big, slow ass sluggish vehicle. But I know that the tier 9, the tier 10 tanks are extremely powerful because of their armor, which kind of just completely overdoes every other part in the game. I know there are other super heavy tanks out in the game, like the Mouse, for example, the E100, or even the new Amex M50 or M54 MLE, something like that. They are all super heavies, but all of them have kind of weak spots. The Type 5 Heavy just has like a super heavily armored side panel, a really annoying gun, which is a derp gun. I'm not even sure what the caliber is, but it does 500 damage per shot on a mouse with high explosive ammunition. And that's the big issue right there. I think this is the problem with the Japanese heavy tanks. They are big vehicles that have a lot of armor, that can really take a lot of shots and at the same time punch out these shots and do massive amounts of damage. And that's what I noticed in this vehicle, that you can do the same if you're top tier. Now this is very important. A Japanese tier 6 heavy tank in a tier 6 match is something completely different than a Japanese tier 6 heavy tank in a tier 8 match. This is something that I want you guys to keep in mind, because balancing wise, it's very difficult to balance these tanks. I think, in my opinion, up until right now, the introduction of the Japanese heavy tank line has kind of been a mistake on Wargaming's part. People are upset about the fact that people are shooting gold rounds. I know people are upset about it because gold rounds obviously give you an edge in combat. But at the same time, I can totally understand why people are shooting gold rounds. An example, the OI or the tier 8, tier 7, tier 9 and tier 10 counterpart, because these tanks you're not going to be able to penetrate reliably with your standard rounds of ammunition unless you're a tank destroyer, unless you have the side armor if you're in that tier. And it's really difficult. It's not a lot of fun to go up against these tanks, right? And that's exactly what I have noticed playing this tank. This is a tier 6 tank. I have one-shotted 3 other tier 5 and tier 6 heavy tanks. I have done 2069 damage with this vehicle in just 3 hits. Now keep in mind, the biggest enemy of this tank is artillery. It's not going to lose a lot of HP, but it's going to get stunned, and it sucks to get stunned in your tanks. You guys know how much I dislike artillery, but it's an needed factor of balancing of this vehicle, because right there you can see 736 damage with AP rounds. Obviously this is a tier 6 match, keep that in mind. We're not playing against tier 8 opponents. Tier 8 opponents will be easily able to penetrate your tank, while tier 6 tanks, tier 5 and tier 4s are just kind of lost. And this is kind of the problem with these vehicles, with these Japanese super heavy tanks. These smaller tanks can't really do a lot against them. Now, am I screaming for a nerf? Do we need a complete nerf of these tanks? I'm not sure if I'm the person to be asking for that. I haven't played the other super heavy tanks. I don't own a lot of super heavy tanks except for the E100, and that thing I think is balanced. But I think with the current setup, some of the Japanese super heavy tanks are way out of line, especially with their gun. The Type 5 Heavy, for example, is one of the most annoying vehicles to fight against if you're in tier 10 match, if you're playing, I'm not sure if you're playing let's say a mouse, and you're trying to get up to this guy. You're unable to penetrate his frontal part of the armor without APCR ammunition, but you can pretty much be guaranteed that he's going to hit you and do damage to you with his high explosive tank rounds, right? And that's, I think, is the whole problem. I thought the tank was okay. If you want to give them good armor, well, I'm not against it. You're just gonna be on the receiving end of a lot of premium shells. I mean, you should not fault the player for having to resort to premium ammunition fighting this vehicle. You should pretty much fault Wargaming for introducing a vehicle that you cannot penetrate with standard ammunition. That's all on them, right? And you guys know I have really supported a lot of their work recently, but it's always important, you know, to have to criticize them in the important parts, things that need to be adjusted, and I think this needs to be adjusted. Right now, I'm at almost full HP, 3000 damage, and there is no real threat to me except for that Tiger 131, the KB2, and the T-34-85M. But all of these tanks have been taken out. 2 of them have been taken out by me, and 1 of them is somewhere in the back. Now, you're not going to know how this game is going to end. I'm not going to spoil it for you. We're going to watch it completely through. It's really interesting just to see how Wargaming are handling these kind of situations with these super heavy tanks. I mean, they're adding more tanks with more armor. If we look at their record the last year, they have added the FV217B, the Badger. That one has 355 millimeters of frontal armor. Really, really strong. It has one weak spot, there's the lower plate. Other than that, you can only really hurt it from the side or with artillery. Same goes for the super French heavy tanks. That huge thing is really, really strong up front, but really, really weak on the side. This is a big profile. And I think, generally speaking, they want to up the armor in those heavy tanks matchup. But at the same time, they're reducing the penetration of these tanks. The Badger doesn't have like 290 millimeters of pen, it does have 270 millimeters of pen. That is quite good for heavy tanks, but not very good for tank destroyers if you keep that in mind. But it has one of the highest rates of fires in the game, next to the Tortoise. That thing has still the highest DPM in the game. And then you have the Japanese heavy tanks. And previously, when they had those AP firing guns, which were not really good with high explosive ammunition, they had the problem of, they're really heavily armored, they're slow, but at the same time, they have a really kind of okay gun, decent gun, but nothing too special. And people were not really grinding these tanks when they came out. They were nowhere near as excited as they were with, let's say, I'm not sure, when they released the Swedish tank destroyer line. I think that was a complete different story. The Swedish tanks obviously brought really new, fresh wind into the game and has gotten like the people excited about World of Tanks again. And these Japanese heavy tanks just didn't do the same thing as the Swedish tanks did. And with that change, moving it over to high explosives, obviously we already have a problem with high explosive tanks. HE spam in some games, at least for me. High explosive, in my opinion, is a curse and a blessing at the same time, because I think all of us people, we love to see, like, at least as long as we're not driving a Grille, for example, or as long as we're not driving an RHM Borsig, we love to see someone shoot high explosive round at that thing and just, take it out with 2 shots that do like 600 damage, while you usually only do, I'm not sure, 100 and, no, let's say, 250 or 300 damage standard with AP rounds. I mean, that's really something super cool, because these tanks don't have armor, but they have great armaments. The problem with the Japanese tanks is just, it kind of sucks to see them having great armor, having a gun that is really good with high explosive, and then you cannot really damage them, while they can smush you in the face, although you do have the armor, but it kind of gets completely sidetracked and neglected because of because of the fact that they can shoot high explosive at your face. that's just the problem conundrum that we have with the Japanese heavy tanks, and I think that's the reason why people are really upset about Japanese heavy tanks. And I've noticed playing this tank, I've played 2 games. I've got my mastery badge ace tanker, and I think I've got average damage of about, what was it, 3000 damage? And this is the 15 centimeter gun that has 150 millimeters pen with AP rounds. Now obviously against tier 8s it's not going to cut it anymore, but just imagine, like, you can see I'm at 8 kills. This is my first game in this tank. I know it's fully upgraded. I kind of didn't want to play a stock Japanese heavy tank, and still I was able to roll through this entire map for a very long time, keeping my HP pool alive. The only real threat that was shooting me was the Tiger and this T-3485M, and he gets a very nice shot on me, and he manages to take me out of the game, and they win this round. I get 8 kills though, still high caliber, all that kind of stuff, these medals. But it has opened a lot of room for discussion, at least for a longer time. I've always hated going up against Japanese heavy tanks. Now, being on the side of being able to play Japanese heavy tanks, I can see how kind of unbalanced it is in certain aspects, but I want to keep you guys, like, I want you guys to remember that this tank in a scenario against tier 8s is nowhere near as good as it is against only tier 6 tanks. And at the same time, with artillery, this tank is going to suffer a lot. That usually is the balancing mechanic for this tank. Once you get the side and the rear, this vehicle is toast because it does not have that additional armor. But it's just really difficult for me to say that, well, I cannot say it's overpowered because in certain matchmaking situations it is not. But I cannot say at the same time it's balanced, because when you're playing against tier 5, tier 4 and tier 6 opponents with no artillery at all, well, it's just kind of, it's breaking a lot of stuff, because, well, let's face it, they were not able to penetrate me. Only 1 or 2 guys were shooting gold at me. The T-3485M, I chatted with him afterwards in the match, after the match ended, and he told me he had no more gold rounds, and he was not sure if he was going to be able to penetrate me. And it was kind of a bad play by me, just, to drive out there. But I didn't really care. I just wanted to see if I could, bounce the T-3485M. And I think it's this kind of position right now where these Japanese heavy tanks are that is really difficult, because they're not, in some situations they're really annoying. Then in other situations, when you can get around them, they're easy to take care of. But at the same time, it's difficult. You cannot say a tank should only be able to be taken out of the game by help with artillery. I think you should be able, at least if you're at other tier 10 tank, to be able to penetrate that tank at least at 1 or 2 spots with standard rounds, and then let it go down, to come down to skill, to see if one of the guys is going to be able to take the upper hand. Obviously tanks are different, but at the same time I think it's not fair to say that I, in my T110 E5, should, take the brunt of that tank, not being able to penetrate him with standard rounds, so I have to resort to my heat rounds to take him out. I think this is just kind of messed up at the moment right now. But yeah, I'd love to hear you guys' opinion on this thing. Japanese heavy tanks, do you think they're balanced right now? Should they, be completely changed around? Should they only get their AP guns back? How do you see it? How do you see the current position of armor in World of Tanks? And yeah, I'll see you guys on the next one.